Well, good evening, everyone. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Tonight's talk is on the subject of Liber Resh, a ritual of daily solar devotion, adoration, and meditation that is a standard of Thelemic magical practice. The symbol of the sun is of central importance in both Thelema and in the spirituality of Ordo Templi Orientis. In the radiance of the sun are the principles which inform the divinity of the cosmos and of the human being. By the end of this talk, you will understand what these principles are, why the sun symbolizes them, and how regularly practicing Liber Resh will allow you to participate directly with those principles for the purpose of wisdom, freedom, and happiness. I'm giving tonight's talk through Horizon Lodge Ordo Templi Orientis in Seattle, Washington. At Horizon, our mission is to empower people to unlock their freedom and creative potential through the understanding and application of Thelema. We are an inclusive community whose goal is to inspire individuals to embrace and express their unique spiritual path by making Thelema their own. We provide a communal experience of Thelema in Seattle by offering the ecclesiastical and initiatory rites of OTO, original magical rituals, social events, and classes such as these. If you find this instruction valuable, please consider donating to Horizon. You will see a link to donate in the description of this video. I'm Entelecheia. I am a longtime member of OTO and of Horizon. I am an ordained priest and deacon in Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, and I am a certified initiator in Mysteria Mystica Maxima. While I am giving tonight's talk through Horizon OTO, I do not speak on behalf of Horizon or OTO. I'm not speaking with authority in OTO, and the views expressed in this talk are not necessarily those of OTO. What I'm sharing is based on my own study and experience of Liber Resh and the symbolism of Thelema and OTO. My hope is that you find it compelling, stimulating, and useful. So what is Liber Resh? Liber Resh is a short ritual Aleister Crowley first published in 1911 in number 6 of his journal, The Equinox. It is a publication in Class D, meaning it is an official ritual of Crowley's magical order AA. He described it in the appendix of Book 4 as an instruction for adoration of the sun 4 times daily, with the object of composing the mind to meditation and of regularizing the practices. The ritual is performed by facing the direction of the sun 4 times a day, at dawn, at noon when the sun is at its zenith, at sunset, and at nadir when it is opposite its noon position. One gives what is called a grade sign. Then one offers an invocation to the sun. This is followed by an adoration and a period of meditation. It can take anywhere from around 1.5 minutes or longer, depending on what type of meditation one does and for how long. The full title of the ritual is Liber Resh Velhelias sub figura 200. Resh is a letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Its English meaning is head. In the Hermetic Kabbalah utilized by Crowley, Resh is associated with the 30th path on the Tree of Life and Atu 19, the Sun card, and the Tarot Major Arcana. Helios is the Greek god of the sun. In Gematria, which is the practice of assigning numbers to letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Resh has a value of 200. Thus, the full title of this ritual in English is Book Head, or Helios, the Greek sun god, under the figure of 200. Liber Resh is assigned to probationers of the AA. In the AA graded system of initiation, the probationer is the grade immediately after student and immediately before neophyte. Even though Liber Resh is an official ritual of the AA, there are good reasons for all Thelemites to practice it, regardless of their AA grade or whether they are in AA at all. Grady Lewis McMurtry, also known as Hymenaeus Alpha, was the outer head of the Order of OTO from 1971 until his death in 1985. He reported that he once witnessed Aleister Crowley discreetly perform Resh while riding public transit in the 1940s. In a letter from Crowley to McMurtry from the same period, Crowley mentions having shown McMurtry how to do Liber Resh, despite McMurtry not being an aspirant to the AA. He also mentions having shown McMurtry how to perform Resh using the degree signs of OTO instead of the grade signs of AA. In Liber 124 of Eden and the Sacred Oak, Crowley says that all residents in OTO profess houses are formally bound to perform the 4 daily salutations to the sun as prescribed in Liber 200. Residents at the Abbey of Thelema, a Thelemic monastery Crowley maintained in Cefalù, Sicily from 1920 to 1923, were expected to perform Resh, and Crowley mentions the ritual many times and in many contexts throughout the years. All of this points to Crowley having considered Liber Resh to be an essential practice for all Thelemites, not just probationers to the AA. But what is it about Liber Resh that makes it so essential? Crowley gives a somewhat fuller description of Liber Resh and its purpose in his autobiography, The Confessions of Aleister Crowley. The object of this practice, he says, is firstly to remind the aspirant at regular intervals of the great work, secondly, to bring him into conscious personal relations with the center of our system, and thirdly, for advanced students to make actual magical contact with the spiritual energy of the sun, and thus to draw actual force from him. From this quote, we can identify 3 reasons to practice Resh. 1, as a reminder of the great work. 2, consciousness of the center. And 3, magical contact with the sun. Let's consider each in turn. Crowley repeats his assertion that Resh serves to remind one of the great work in the introduction to Magick Without Tears. There he says, "The first essential is the dedication of all that one is and all that one has to the great work, without reservation of any sort. This must be kept constantly in mind. The way to do this is to practice Liber Resh vel Helios sub figura 200. But what is the great work, and in what way does Liber Resh practice support it by reminding one of it? In the same chapter of Magick Without Tears, Crowley says, "The great work is the uniting of opposites. It may mean the uniting of the soul with God, of the microcosm with the macrocosm, of the female with the male, of the ego with the non-ego, or whatnot." In chapter 0 of Magick in Theory and Practice, he says, "The microcosm is an exact image of the macrocosm. The great work is the raising of the whole man in perfect balance to the power of infinity." The great work is the exaltation of the individual, what Crowley refers to as the microcosm, so as to unite it with what he refers to as God or the macrocosm. In the context of Thelema, the sun is the symbol of God in the macrocosm. For example, in Liber 15, otherwise known as the Gnostic Mass, the central ritual of OTO, the priest refers to the sun as our Lord in the universe. The deacon describes the sun as the visible and sensible Lord, the source of light and life on earth, who makes our labor and enjoyment possible. Later, the priest addresses the sun as our Lord and Father that traveleth over the heavens. Another phrase Crowley used to describe the great work was the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. In the first chapter of Magick in Theory and Practice, he says, "There is a single main definition of the object of all magical ritual. It is the uniting of the microcosm with the macrocosm. The supreme and complete ritual is therefore the invocation of the holy guardian angel, or in the language of mysticism, union with God." In Crowley's magical teaching order, the AA, this attainment was attributed to the grade of Adeptus Minor. In his essay, 1 Star in Sight, which describes the system of attainment of the AA, Crowley describes the grade of Adeptus Minor as, quote, "the main theme of the instructions of the AA. It is characterized by the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel." The grade of Adeptus Minor is attributed to the Sephira Tifereth on the Tree of Life, which represents the sun. In the Book of Thoth, Crowley says that Tifereth is, in some respects, the most important Sephira of all. It is the center of the whole system. It is the only sephira below the abyss which communicates directly with Kether. It is fed directly from Chokmah into Bina, and also from Hesed and Geborah. It is thus admirably fitted to dominate the lower Sephiroth. It is balanced both vertically and horizontally. In the planetary system, it represents the sun. In the system of Tetragrammaton, it represents the sun, S-O-N. The entire geometrical complex of the Ruach may be regarded as an expansion from Tifereth. So in the Kabbalistic theory of the soul, the Ruach is the discriminatory faculty, or what we might consider reason or the intellect. It represents consciousness in its most harmonized and balanced form. Definitely in form, not only an idea, as in the case of the number 2. In other words, the sun, S-O-N, is an interpretation of the Father in terms of the mind. So the sun is a representation of God, or the holy guardian angel with whom we unite in the accomplishment of the great work. It also represents those qualities of mind, balance, and harmony necessary for the accomplishment of the great work. And as the son of Tetragrammaton, it represents the adept, the mediator between God and humanity that the individual becomes in accomplishing the great work. For all of these reasons, physically facing the sun 4 times daily and adoring the sun as we do in Liber Resh serves to remind us of the great work. We will now consider how Liber Resh keeps us conscious of the center of our system. In chapter 3, verse 22 of the Book of the Law, we read, "The other images group around me to support me. Let all be worshipped, for they shall cluster to exalt me. I am the visible object of worship. The others are secret. For the beast and his bride are they, and for the winners of the ordeal X. What is this thou shalt know?" Commenting on this passage, Crowley says, "There are to be no regular temples of Nuith and Hadit, for they are incommensurables and absolutes. Our religion, therefore, for the people is the cult of the sun, who is our particular star of the body of Nuit, from whom in the strictest scientific sense come this earth, a chilled spark of him and all of our light and life." Nuit and Hadit are the 2 most fundamental deities in the Thelemic universe. They are the personages represented in chapters 1 and 2 of the Book of the Law, respectively. In his 1938 introduction to the Book of the Law, Crowley describes them as the, quote, elements of the cosmos. This book explains the universe, Crowley says. The elements are Nuit, space, that is, the total of possibilities of every kind, and Hadit, any point which has experience of these possibilities. This idea is for literary convenience, symbolized by the Egyptian goddess Nuit, a woman bending over like the arch of the night sky. Hadit is symbolized as a winged globe at the heart of Nuit. At the foundation of the Thelemic universe, we do not find a single supreme being, as in the monotheistic religions, as in Advaita Vedanta, or as in naturalistic monism. Instead, we find 2 deities, Nuit, or possibility, and Hadit, or the point which experiences or realizes these possibilities. Yet even though Nuit and Hadit are the 2 supreme deities in Thelema, Crowley says it is inappropriate to worship them because they are, quote, incommensurables and absolutes. To be incommensurable means to have no common measure. Nuit and Hadit may be the most fundamental deities in the Thelemic universe, but we have no way to relate to them with our intellects or with our imaginations. In the Gnostic Mass, the priest describes Nuit as the soul of infinite space, before whom time is ashamed, the mind bewildered, and the understanding dark. Quoting from chapter 1, verse 27 of the Book of the Law, he says, "O Nuit, continuous one of heaven, let it be ever thus, that men speak not of thee as one, but as none, and let them speak not of thee at all, since thou art continuous." Shortly thereafter, he addresses Hadit and indicates an entirely different reason he may not be directly adored. O secret of secrets that art hidden in the being of all that lives, not thee do we adore, for that which adoreth is also thou. Thou art that, and that am I. Because of her unfathomable immensity, we can form no mental image of Nuit. She exceeds the imagination. But we also cannot form an image of Hadit, not because he is so immense, but rather because he is too close to us. At our deepest level, we are identical with him. Instead, Crowley says we are to orient ourselves toward the sun and worship him. The sun, as the center of our system, has at least two meanings in the context of Thelema. First, the sun is the center of our solar system. Ancient religions' notions of immortality and salvation were based upon the observation that God, the sun, died and was reborn again daily and over the course of the equinoxes and the solstices. The Copernican revolution in astronomy established that the Earth, in fact, moves around the sun, not vice versa. And so the sun is not dependent upon our sacrifices for its immortality. Rather, the Earth depends for its existence on the sun, as it is but a frozen spark of that star. Therefore, orienting ourselves toward the sun as the spiritual center, as Crowley says in Liber Aleph, affirms our place in nature and her harmonies. And it is an implicit rejection of the superstitious doctrines of atonement and self-sacrifice of older religions. But there is a second sense in which the sun symbolizes the center, and that is as the center of ourselves. In the Gnostic Mass, while giving his speech on the third step of the altar, the priest says, "Thou that art one, our Lord in the universe the Son, our Lord in ourselves, whose name is Mystery of Mystery. Outermost being whose radiance enlightening the worlds is also the breath that maketh every god even and death to tremble before thee." The sun in the heavens is a symbol of unity. The sun unifies the solar system by means of the force of gravity. Above and beyond all other celestial beings, we are dependent upon him for our light and life. For this reason, he is uniquely adored by us. But the unity of the sun is mirrored within ourselves. As the sun is Lord in the universe, there is also a Lord within ourselves, which Crowley refers to as mystery of mystery. And just as the sun is the symbol of immortality in the heavens, so is this Lord within us connected with our own immortality as spiritual beings. Crowley refers to this interior Lord as the Son of the Soul, or the silent self. It is the will of this silent self, unconscious, latent within us, to which we must conform if our magic is going to be effective. Writing in his new comments on L152, Crowley says, "He will choose the object of his passion at the nod of his silent self. He will not allow the prejudice either of sense, emotion, or rational judgment to obscure the sun of his soul." Earlier, we looked at a passage in which Crowley said that the exoteric object of religious worship for Thelemites was the sun. In the same passage, he goes on to say, "The sun's vice-regent and representative in the animal kingdom is his cognate symbol, the phallus, representing love and liberty. Rahor Kuit, like all true gods, is therefore a solar phallic deity. But we regard him as he is in truth, eternal. The solar phallic deities of the old aeons, such as Osiris, Christ, Hiram, Adonis, Hercules, etc., were supposed, through our ignorance of the cosmos, to die and rise again. Thus, we celebrated rites of crucifixion and so on, which have now become meaningless. Rahor Kuit is the crowned and conquering child. This is also a reference to the crowned and conquering child in ourselves, our own personal God. Except ye become as little children, said Christ, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of God. And you have to really appreciate these repeated quote marks around Christ, crucifixions, as they say. He goes on to say, the kingdom of Malkuth, the virgin bride and the child is the dwarf self, the phallic consciousness which is the true life of man, beyond his veils of incarnation. We have to thank Freud and especially Jung for stating this part of the magical doctrine so plainly, as also for their development of the connection of the will of this child with the true or unconscious will, and so for clarifying our doctrine of the silent self or the holy guardian angel. Right. So what he's linking together is the unity that pertains to the Son is to be found within us as a secret internal Son, which is tightly linked with this idea of an unconscious will and of the libido and a kind of general energy of life bringing us forward. When we orient ourselves religiously, magically, and meditatively toward the Son, we're also orienting ourselves toward that symbolic Son within ourselves, the holy guardian angel, or the true self, the real center of our own beings. Just as the earth is a cast-off spark of the physical sun, we are projections in space and time of immortal beings who transcend all limitations. The earth's relationship to the sun is one of dependence. If the light of the sun ceased for even a moment, probably all life on earth would die. Likewise, the way we appear to ourselves by means of our senses, our imaginations, and our intellects does not represent who we really are. We are not self-sufficient beings. We are not the centers of ourselves. Our minds and bodies are mere instruments of God's reveling in the joy of existence. Following the usage of Richard Payne Knight and Hargrave Jennings, the phallus is a term for the generative principle more generally. It's not the male sex organ per se. It is both male and female, and is properly represented by Baphomet, Babylon, and the use of the lance and the union of the lance and the grail in the Gnostic Mass. It represents the path of love or union, by means of which we come into contact with God within and unite with our true selves. This brings us to the third purpose Crowley assigned to the practice of Liber Resh, establishing magical contact with the sun. While Crowley describes the great work as the union of the microcosm with the macrocosm, he sometimes uses the Kabbalistic language of tetragrammaton to do the same. For example, in the third chapter of Magic in Theory and Practice, he writes, the formation of the yod is the formulation of the first creative force, of that Father who is called self-begotten, and unto whom it is said, thou hast formulated thy father and made fertile thy mother. The adding of the het to the yod is the marriage of that father to the great co-equal mother, who is a reflection of Nuit as he is of Hadid. Their union brings forth the son, Vau, who is the heir. Finally, the daughter He is produced. She is both the twin sister and the daughter of Vau. His mission is to redeem her by making her his bride. The result of this is to set her upon the throne of the mother. And it is only she whose youthful embrace can reawaken the eld of the All-Father. In this complex family relationship is symbolized the whole course of the universe. It will be seen that, after all, the climax is at the end. It is the second half of the formula which symbolizes the great work which we are pledged to accomplish. The first step of this is the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, which constitutes the adept of the inner order. Okay, so in this complicated quote, Crowley is referring to the four-part tetragrammaton, Yod He Vav He. In this formula, the final He, or the daughter, is the natural soul of the individual. In chapter 6 of part 2 of book 4, he writes, "In one, the best system of magic, the absolute is called the crown, God is called the father, the pure soul is called the mother, the holy guardian angel is called the son, and the natural soul is called the daughter." There we go. The son purifies the daughter by wedding her. She thus becomes the mother, the uniting of whom with the father absorbs all into the crown. By natural soul, Crowley means those spiritual instincts given to us by nature. Another word for the natural soul is nephesh. As Crowley says in Little Essays Toward Truth, the nephesh is the instrument by which the mind is brought into contact with the dust of matter in the abyss, that it may feel it, judge it, and react to it. This is itself a principle still spiritual, in a sense. The actual body of man is composed of the dust of matter, temporarily held together by the principles which inform it for their own purposes. In its traffic with matter, it tends to partake of its incoherence. Its faculties of perceiving pain and pleasure lure it into paying undue attention to one set of phenomena and to shunning another. Hence, for the nephesh to do its work as it should, it requires to be dominated by the severest discipline. So I'll use the Gnostic Mass to illustrate this because it's a common ritual that a lot of us know. But at the outset of the Gnostic Mass, the priestess is referred to as the Virgin, thus implicitly identifying her with the daughter of Tetragrammaton, and thus with the natural soul, this capacity of basic sensation, but also attraction and repulsion to matter is what's involved in the natural soul. The lance of the priest, which he immediately lowers upon issuing forth from the tomb in the ceremony of the introit, is equally, and perhaps even more so, to be identified with the nephesh, or the natural soul. The discipline the priestess applies to the priest allows him to raise the lance. It's one of the first dramatic acts in the ritual. The action of raising the lance symbolizes his attainment to the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel, and his transformation into an adept. As we saw before, the adept is the personification both of the sun, S-U-N, and the son of Tetragrammaton. It is by virtue of his status as an adept that the priest is then able to raise the priestess, now the daughter, to the altar, the throne of the mother. In the context of Thelema, the mother principle of Tetragrammaton is called Babylon. Babylon is a goddess that Crowley encountered through scrying the Enochian aethers, the experience of whom he recorded in his magical record, The Vision and the Voice. Describing his vision of the 12th aether, he writes, "This is the mystery of Babylon, the mother of abominations, and this is the mystery of her adulteries. For she hath yielded up herself to everything that liveth, and hath become a partaker in its mystery. And because she hath made herself the servant of each, therefore is she become the mistress of all. Not as yet canst thou comprehend her glory. Beautiful art thou, O Babylon, and desirable, for thou hast given thyself to everything that liveth, and thy weakness hath subdued their strength. For in that union thou didst understand, therefore art thou called understanding, O Babylon, Lady of the Night." In The Vision and the Voice, Babylon is represented as a goddess. But Crowley also understood her as a spiritual attainment in which one accepted all experiences without discrimination. For example, in the 4th chapter of the Book of Lies, titled Peaches, he wrote, "Soft and hollow, how thou dost overcome the hard and full. It dies, it gives itself to thee as the fruit. Be thou the bride, thou shalt be the mother hereafter. To all impressions thus, let them not overcome thee, yet let them breed within thee. The least of the impressions come to its perfection is Pan. Receive 1,000 lovers, thou shalt bear but one child. This child shall be the heir of the fate, the father." Commenting on this passage, he said, "Daleth is the empress of the tarot, the letter of Venus, and the title Peaches again refers to the yoni. The chapter is a counsel to accept all impressions. It is the formula of the Scarlet Woman. But no impression must be allowed to dominate you, only to fructify you. Just as the artist, seeing an object, does not worship it, but breeds a masterpiece from it. This process is exhibited as one aspect of the great work." So by impressions here, Crowley means sense impressions, basic qualitative experiences that you're having right this moment. One's mind, with its natural impulses, is the daughter or half final of Tetragrammaton. As we saw earlier, the connection of the natural soul with matter causes it to be pushed this way and that, to be attracted to pleasurable experiences, repulsed by the unpleasant ones, bored with the neutral ones. Part of the great work involves training one's natural impulses so as to develop radical acceptance of all changes as they occur, a kind of equanimity. This transformation is symbolized by the exaltation of the daughter to the throne of the mother. The natural soul, Crowley says, becomes a whore, essentially. It accepts all. It takes everything in. This, he says, reawakens the eld of the All-Father. The All-Father is Yod of Tetragrammaton. It's the secret self that we were talking about before. It's that hidden spiritual sun within. Once our minds are wide open and accepting, this secret self will then be loosed onto us. Describing this process in his new comment on L17, Crowley says, "The concealed child becomes the conquering child, the armed Horus avenging his father Osiris. So also our own silent self, helpless and witless, hidden within us, will spring forth if we have craft to loose him to the light. Spring lustily forward with his cry of battle, the word of our true wills." This is the task of the adept, to have the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel, to become aware of his nature and his purpose, fulfilling them. Crowley ultimately chose to spell Babylon with an A rather than a Y. Bab, B-A-B, is the Arabic word for door or gate, and El the name for God. On is the name of the Egyptian city that the Greeks called Heliopolis, or the city of the sun. It is a name by which the priest refers to the sun in the Gnostic Mass. Thus, the goddess Babylon is the gate of the god On, or the sun. In the 55th verse of the 3rd chapter of the Book of the Law, we read, "Let Mary inviolate be torn upon wheels. For her sake, let all chaste women be utterly despised among you." Reflecting upon the symbolism of the mother, Crowley, commenting on this verse, says, "She is Shakti, the Te, the magical door between the Tao and the manifested world. The great obstacle, then, is if that door be locked up. Therefore, Our Lady must be symbolized as an whore." We can only establish magical contact with the sun of our souls by radically opening ourselves to the outward flow of the divine fire from within. We must become whores to our personal gods. We must become Babylon. Crowley gives us yet another metaphor for this process in chapter 15 of the Book of Lies, titled The Gun Barrel. Mighty and erect is this will of mine, this pyramid of fire whose summit is lost in heaven. Upon it have I burned the corpse of my desires. Mighty and erect is this phallus of my will. The seed thereof is that which I have borne within me from eternity, and it is lost within the body of Our Lady of the Stars. I am not I am but an hollow tube to bring down fire from heaven. Mighty and marvelous is this weakness, this heaven which draweth me into her womb, this dome which hideth, which absorbeth me. This is the night wherein I am lost, the love through which I am no longer I. In this chapter, the phallus is described as identical with the personal or natural will of the individual, what we have already seen him elsewhere describe as the daughter or half final of Tetragrammaton. When it becomes fully erect, it undergoes a polarity shift. It becomes an organ for the reception of fire from heaven. In other words, the power of our Lord and Father, the Son. The phallus switches from being an organ of penetration to being penetrated instead. The phallus becomes Babylon. Crowley understood gender fluidity as essential to the accomplishment of the great work. Commenting on chapter 2, verse 56 of Liber 65, he wrote, "Having attained the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, by a male effort, so to speak, the adept becomes receptive, feminine, patient, surrendering his will wholly to that of his angel." In his commentary on chapter 5, verse 44 of the same holy book, he identifies the refusal to transcend the opposition of sex with the black brother. The male must have completed himself and become androgyne, the female and become gynander. This incompleteness imprisons the soul. To think, I am not woman but man, or vice versa, is to limit oneself, to set a bar to one's motion. It is the root of the shutting up which culminates in become Mary inviolate or a black brother. In his comment on L18, Crowley describes these self-limitations to the great work as complexes, the dissolution of which transforms oneself from a dark star into a passive medium of the light of the sun within. We are not to regard ourselves as base beings, without whose sphere is light or God. Our minds and bodies are veils of the light within. The uninitiate is a dark star, and the great work for him is to make his veils transparent by purifying them. This purification is really simplification. It is not that the veil is dirty, but that the complexity of its folds makes it opaque. The great work, therefore, consists principally in the solution of complexes. Resolving our complexes, making ourselves transparent, making ourselves receptive and affirmative, becoming spiritually androgynous or female, raising our natural souls to the throne of the mother, and becoming whores. These are all metaphors for the same process in which we become radically open to the divine energies flowing from the unfathomable depths of ourselves out into the universe. To transform oneself into the passive conduit for this flow of interior sunlight is likely what Crowley had in mind when he said that for advanced practitioners, Liber Resh offers a way to establish magical contact with the energy of the sun. It's magical contact with the God within. In verse 38 of chapter 3 of the Book of the Law, we read, "So that thy light is in me, and its red flame is as a sword in my hand to push thy order. There is a secret door that I shall make to establish thy way in all the quarters. These are the adorations, as thou hast written, as it is said, the light is mine. Its rays consume me. I have made a secret door into the house of Ra, Entum, of Khafra and of Ahathor. I am thy Theban Omentu, the prophet Ankh-Afnakansu. Having established the theoretical base for doing Resh, let's walk through the text with an eye toward practical considerations. The text begins. These are the adorations to be performed by aspirants to the AA. As we saw, Liber Resh is not just for aspirants to the AA, but for all Thelemites. The next line of the text reads, let him greet the sun at dawn, facing east, giving the sign of his grade. The next three sections begin similarly, with modifications made for the time of day. Also at noon, let him greet the sun facing south, giving this time the sign of his grade. Also at sunset, let him greet the sun facing west, giving the sign of his grade. Lastly, at midnight, let him greet the sun facing north, giving the sign of his grade. So there are at least three senses that dawn can have here for the dawn adoration. It can mean astronomical dawn. This begins when the sun is 18 degrees below the horizon. It can mean nautical dawn when there is enough illumination for sailors to distinguish the horizon at sea. This begins when the sun is 12 degrees below the horizon. And there is civil dawn, which is when there is enough light for most objects to be distinguishable. This occurs when the sun is 6 degrees below the horizon. One thing dawn does not mean is sunrise. The dawn resh is meant to be performed before the sun is risen. Noon can mean either 12 o'clock in the daytime, or it can mean solar noon. In other words, that time when the sun appears to contact the local celestial meridian, or when it is at the highest point in the sky. Sunset's more straightforward. It is when the upper limb of the sun disappears below the horizon. Midnight is either the moment when the date changes in your location, or it is solar midnight, which is the time opposite to solar noon. In other words, when the sun is at its nadir. You can easily determine the times of these occurrences using an astronomical website, such as timeanddate.com. Brother Scott Wild has also created an app to determine these for you based on your location. It sounds a gong when it is time to do one of the Resh adorations. You can find it at his site, keepsilence.org/clock. Most practitioners of Resh are not that strict about the times. So it's common for people who have missed an adoration to do it at the next convenient moment. For example, it's very common to do the midnight adoration upon waking. My suggestion is that if you have never tried to before, set a period of time where you do them exactly, for a week or 2 weeks or however long you think you can do it, just to see what it's like, just to have the experience of doing it. It's unrealistic to expect that you will stick to a regime that's strict. Most people are not able to do it, but it's definitely valuable to set a finite period of time just to see what that practice is like. The phrase, the sign of his grade, refers to the signs of the grades of AA. This direction is for aspirants to the AA who are doing Resh. Crowley noted in his own personal copy of the Equinox the signs that should be given by someone who is not an AA aspirant. He said, where the aspirant has no grade, let him give the LVX signs at dawn, 4 = 7 at noon, 2 = 9 at sunset, 3 = 8 at midnight. So these signs are illustrated in Liber O, which is in the second volume of the Equinox, and which you can also find online. So the LVX signs are Osiris slain, which is the form of the cross, Isis mourning, the swastika, Typhon, the trident, and Osiris risen. The 4 = 7 sign given at noon is the sign of fire and the goddess Tum Aishneith. It's done like this. The 2=9 sign given at sunset is the sign of air, or the god Shu supporting the sky. So feet together, hands up like you're shrugging, head down. The 3=8, or water sign, is the goddess Aramoth. Triangle here in the center of your chest. You can either remain in the sign throughout the entire invocation. What I usually do is I give the sign and I put my hands at the side. If one is an initiate of OTO, they can give the sign of recognition of whatever degree they happen to be. Once you are a 3rd degree, you can give the 1st degree sign at dawn, 2nd degree sign at noon, 3rd degree sign at sunset, and the 0 degree sign at midnight. After giving the sign, the instructions say that the practitioner is to say in a loud voice, I was supposed to show you these, my bad. There's the LVX signs. These are very clear scans from that Scott has on keepsilence.org. You can see all the nuances of it. Here are the other signs. So after giving the sign, the instructions say that the practitioner is to say in a loud voice, Hail unto thee, Hord Ra, in thy rising, even unto thee, Hord Ra, in thy strength, who travellest over the heavens in thy bark at the uprising of the sun. Tahuti standeth in his splendor at the prow, and Ra-Hor abideth at the helm. Hail unto thee from the abodes of night. So the invocation describes the solar bark, a vessel utilized by the sun god Ra throughout the course of the sun's journey across the sky. Ra was said to use a vessel called the Manjet, or the boat of millions of years, during the day, and at night he used what was called the Magick. This is the only clear image I was able to find of this online. The other 3 invocations are similar, except the gods, their stations, their qualities, their points in the journey, and their hailing abodes are different. So it's kind of like you swap them out, basically. But it all follows the same pattern. I'm not going to, demonstrate each one. The particular gods chosen are those mentioned on the Stele of Revealing, a paraphrase of which Crowley was directed by Iwaz to insert into verse 38 of chapter 3 of the Book of the Law. I quoted it earlier. The light is mine, its rays consume me. I have made a secret door into the house of Ra and tomb, of Khepra and of Ahathor. Ra was considered by the Egyptians to be the king of the deities and the father of all creation. He was the patron of the sun, heaven, kingship, power, and light. Ahathor, or Hathor, was the goddess of love, beauty, music, dancing, fertility, and pleasure. She was depicted either with a cow's head or as a woman wearing cow's horns. Tum, or Atum, is the primordial god in Egyptian mythology from whom all else arose. He created both himself and is the father of Shu and Tefnut, the ancestors of all the other Egyptian gods. Khepra, or Khepri, is a scarab-faced god in ancient Egyptian religion who represents the rising or morning sun. He represents creation and the renewal of life. There is evidence that Crowley practiced Resh at times with different gods attributed to the quarters than those mentioned in Equinox 6. As Hymenaeus Beta has described in the wiser 2nd edition of Magick, Crowley gives the phrase Harmachis in thy beauty, following Ra in thy strength, in his copy of Magick in Theory and Practice, with a line indicating an apparent insertion or replacement. In another manuscript note to his copy of Magick in Theory and Practice, Mao the lion very lordly is written in the margin opposite paragraph 2 of section 2. Crowley remarks in letter A of Magick Without Tears, there is another version of these adorations, slightly fuller, but those in the text, in other words in Equinox 6, are quite all right. The important thing is not to forget. All of this suggests a certain degree of flexibility on Crowley's part over the years with regard to the specific deities utilized in this ritual. Note, we are always hailing the god from an abode that is passing away. For example, we greet the sun from the abodes of night. We greet the noon sun from the abodes of morning, the setting sun from the abodes of day, and the midnight sun from the abodes of evening. The sun is in our future and represents both a physical and a spiritual state we are in the process of entering. Line 5 says, "And after each of these invocations, thou shalt give the sign of silence, and afterward thou shalt perform the adoration that is taught thee by thy superior, and then do thou compose thyself to holy meditation." So the sign of silence is given by pressing one's index finger to one's lips. It symbolizes Harpocrates, or Horpokra, who Crowley took to be the god of silence, and another form of Hadit, or the silent self. Commenting on L221, he says, Hadith calls himself the star being the unit of the macrocosm, and the snake being the symbol of going or love, and the chariot of life. He is Harpocrates, the dwarf soul, the spermatozoon of all life, as one may phrase it. The sun, etc., are the external manifestations or vestures of this soul, as a man is the garment of an actual spermatozoon, the tree sprung of that seed, with power to multiply and to perpetuate that particular nature, though without necessary consciousness of what is happening. So we face and we address the physical sun, Lord visible and sensible, our Lord in the universe, and then we immediately follow this with the sign of silence, the sign of the Lord within ourselves, the secret Lord, of which the sun is merely the outward manifestation. The phrase, the adoration that is taught thee by thy superior, refers to one's superior in AA. If one is not in AA, it is typical to recite the adoration from L 337 to 38. Unity uttermost showed, I adore the might of thy breath. Supreme and terrible God, who makest the gods and death to tremble before thee, I adore thee. Appear on the throne of Ra. Open the ways of the Ku, lighten the ways of the Ka. The ways of the Kabs run through, to stir me or still me. Let it kill me. The light is mine, its rays consume me. I have made a secret door into the house of Ra and tomb of Khepra and of Ahathor. I am thy Theban Omentu, the prophet Ankh-Afnakansu. By Besnamout my breast I beat, by wise Tanek I weave my spell. Show thy star splendor, O new wheat, bid me within thine house to dwell. O winged snake of light Hadit, abide with me, Rahor Kuwait. And then you give the sign of silence again. Now the meditation is not specified, it's of one's choosing. I will lead you right now through one possible meditation that you can do. It's the one that I do. So press your finger to your lips, close your eyes. Now, as best you can, try to listen for the sound of ships being loaded at Harbor Island. Now, where we are right now, Harbor Island is about 7 or 8 miles from here. So you shouldn't actually be able to hear anything happening on Harbor Island right now. But listen to see if you can find it. Now, as you're listening, you're going to hear other things. Like that card that just passed on the street. I can hear the sound of my laptop fan. If you hear something, just notice it, but then go back to listening for the sound of boats being loaded on Harbor Island. Now you'll know that you're doing this right because you'll start to feel a slight opening in the center of the chest. Okay, take a deep breath, let it out, and open your eyes. Now, when we hear an actual occurrence, for example, when that car went by, or I'm listening to the sound of the fan on here, that is the point of contact between the natural soul and matter. Okay, that's just sensation. But when we try to listen for something that we can't possibly hear, the natural soul is reaching out beyond things, beyond objects. It's reaching out into infinite space, into Nuit, essentially. We're not just hearing at that point. Hearing is contact. At that point, we're listening, and the soul is opening. And when you notice yourself hearing, you deliberately switch back to listening, right? The feeling of openness in the chest that you get from that, that's the sign that your feet are on the path of the open heart, right? This is the path which, if you follow it to its end, it leads to Our Lady Babylon and her grail. The Thelemic spiritual path is a way of the heart, of the opening of the heart. It's a way of compassion. Compassion not in the sense of sentimentality or suffering, but rather acceptance and affirmation of the goodness of existence and of being. Now, line 6 of the text reads, and usually when I do the practice, I do the last invocation, sign of silence, and just listen for 15 seconds. It doesn't have to be a complicated thing. Just until you feel the opening. That's all. Do it longer if you want, but it only takes a few seconds. Line 6. Also, it is better if in these adorations thou assume the God form of whom thou adorest, as if thou didst unite with him in the adoration of that which is beyond him. Didst. I can't say that. The assumption of God forms is a practice taught in AA, and it's described in Liber O. So he suggests memorizing the magical images of the gods of Egypt. He says go to a museum. You can just look them up online. And he suggests painting them from an image and also from memory. And then what you're doing in the assumption of God forms is that you picture the image and you make it coincide with your own physical body wrapped around you, is how you do it. So for the Dawn Resh, one would call to mind as vividly as possible the image of Ra that we saw before. And you would then imagine that image of Ra coinciding with you and enveloping your own body while performing the invocation. And then the same is done with Ahathor at noon, with Tum at sunset, and with Kefra at midnight. Who is that which is beyond him? I interpret this to mean the voice of the silence, emanating from the center and secret of the sun. It is this which I am listening for when I'm listening for boats being loaded. Finally, line 7 reads, thus shalt thou ever be mindful of the great work which thou hast undertaken to perform, and thus shalt thou be strengthened to pursue it unto the attainment of the stone of the wise, the summum bonum, true wisdom and perfect happiness. It is my hope that with this talk I've made comprehensible why one would practice Liber Resh and what one could possibly get out of it. It is first a mindfulness practice. It's designed to keep us conscious throughout the day of the great work, the path that we're on. Looked at from this perspective, it serves a purpose similar to that of saying will at meals. Secondly, it serves the purpose of orienting ourselves toward the center. This has the sense of orienting us toward the physical sun, thereby helping us locate ourselves within the matrix of nature. It also has the sense of orienting ourselves toward the center of ourselves, the sun of the soul, which is the source of inner illumination. Thirdly, it serves the purpose of establishing actual magical contact with the secret interior of ourselves. In practicing Liber Resh, we are learning to become receptive and open to the free flow of divine fire from within. Thus, participating in our true centers, we fulfill our reason for existing, which is to radiate the light from within ourselves outward into the womb of Nuit, so that the God within us may revel in creation and enjoy ecstatic union with the goddess without. If you have found this lecture valuable, and I hope you have, please consider donating to Horizon. Your contribution helps us maintain the temple I'm currently standing in, and it allows us to continue to bring you content like what you have just watched. There is a link to donate below. I would like to thank Horizon OTO for hosting this lecture tonight. I would like to thank my friend and technical wizard, Scott Wild, on site as always, who has been generous enough to provide audio video for this and for our other talks. And I would like to thank all of you for your patience and your attention tonight, as I have taken us on an exploration of the Thelemic spiritual path. May your minds be open unto the light. May your hearts be centers of love. May your bodies be temples of life. Love is the law. Love under will. Thank you.